Hey, Accursed. Before we start our show, I wanted to alert you to a new podcast from your friends at Air Quotes Media. Hotel Pacifico, about all things BC politics, premieres this week. Here's the trailer.
Good day, fellow political traveler, and welcome to Hotel Pacifico. We're your 5-star podcast destination for BC politicos, rated number 1 by Stump Advisor. Looking for predictable party lines and all the same spin? Move on. There are no vacancies for you here. But if you want a port in the political storm, a vacation from the hot air, an hour of honesty, insight, and unspun West Coast politics and policy, Hotel Pacifico is absolutely the place for you. Each week, your stay at Hotel Pacifico includes Part 1. Your hosts, strategist and pollster Mike McDonald and award-winning former Globe and Mail journalist Kate Hammer, bring a guest into the hotel for an interview. Somebody famous, or not so famous, but always interesting, involved, and relevant to the BC scene. Part 2. Mike and Kate are joined in our strategy suite by Jeff Meggs, former chief of staff and current comms strategist, for a panel discussion and a breakdown of all the BC political happenings of the week. The Hotel Pacifico podcast. There's always room for you here, so check in anytime you like. BC, you can never leave.
Greetings, you gloriously miserable accursed. David Herle here with our political panel. Whip smart, entertaining. They put the cuss and discuss, the shite in insight. Kory Teneycke, Scott Reid, and Jordan Leichnitz. Today on the pod, Doug Ford's quick rebound in the polls. Surprising? Not surprising? We'll break down why. Then, the political peril of rushing to judgment. Trudeau's and the government's hot take on the Gaza hospital attack, and Blair tasked with slow walking it back. And finally, if Pierre Poilievre eats an apple in an orchard, does anybody hear it? Yep, millions do on social media. They hear it, see it, argue about it, and Colby Kosh writes about it in the National Post, and that's our cursed clipping for today. Finally, the whiskey bar baritone of the great Mr. Pinsent and our Hey Yous. Jordan, Kory, Scott, I just back from a week in the bush, back in downtown Toronto. How are you guys?
A week in the bush. Susanna Moody.
Yeah.
I'm all right. Yeah.
Good. Sporting. David, do you want to tell people why I'm sporting Dylan today?
The Rolling Thunder Review, because we're going to see Bob on Thursday night at Massey Hall. He will not sound anything like the Rolling Thunder Review. No violin, as near as I can tell, on the show.
Okay, so his set will be half Rough and Rowdy Ways, and the other will be a collection of old tunes. But listen to Shadow Kingdom if you want to hear what those sounds will be like on Thursday evening. I've been immersing myself, getting myself in the mood. It's fantastic. Me and Herle, my 2 oldest sons. Oh, it's going to be glorious.
It will be glorious. So I listened to James Carville and Al Hunt's podcast yesterday, and they spent the first 15 minutes talking about the Philadelphia Phillies. Anybody got a rabbit hole they want to take us down?
Let's not do that. Let's not do that.
No. Let's not
tell you about I could tell you about my great dinner last night, but that would bore everyone even more.
What was great about it? The food or the company?
Both. Yeah. Peking duck at Lee Restaurant. Fantastic.
I saw Instagram evidence of this.
Yeah.
You're posting your meals.
Yeah, I know. It's like
I'll know the honeymoon is over when you and Nicole quit posting pictures of yourself eating. That's when I'll know, right? It'll be like, I guess the bloom is off the rose.
Yeah, I don't know, Kory. 2012 called. They'd like their Instagram account back.
Yeah, there you go. Well, I am a middle-aged white man, so, you know.
Did you have the coleslaw? Did you have the slaw?
Oh, yeah, the slaw is unbelievable.
Yeah, that's what you go to eat for, is the slaw.
It's like just down the street from you. It's just
it is.
But it's reopened, right?
That's right. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah. Oh, shit. Sorry, man.
Yeah.
Hey, David and I once went to Lee. Remember that? We went to Lee a long time ago, like 10 years ago, and then the bill came. And I pretended to have a heart attack. Actually, I didn't have to pretend, but I just
No.
I can't reach my wallet. I'm having
You guys have more exciting lives than I do. I've received our bi-weekly virus from daycare, so that's what I'll be doing for the next week.
Oh, dear
Awesome.
God. I remember those days.
You're sick?
No, my kids are, but they'll, I'll get sick eventually.
Give it time. Give it time.
Just block off 2 weeks. That's how it goes,
Fuck. All right, the things I've missed in life. All right, so we're obliged to talk about our first topic. Because every other time we have discussed the Greenbelt controversy on this podcast, we have done so from the perspective of just how damaging to the Ford government this is. Will the next election be entirely about integrity? Will Ford be able to carry on as leader to the next election under the heat of all this? And now we have a poll that puts them back up at 40% in voter support, well above their rivals who are both tied in the mid-20s. So, Scott, how much Teflon does Doug Ford have on? How much Teflon does Doug Ford have on him? And what brand is it? Because it's not that shit Tefal stuff they sell on the TV. This is some serious quality coating.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things going on. One, these things don't generally all collapse at once, right? It is a coating issue, and it's how many dents and how many scratches are there in the Tefal before suddenly you can't cook an egg without it tasting like metal. And I think that's a concern they have to have. And it's not an abstract concern. I mean, there's a new story this morning from Global News has broken a story that, like, check this out, that the executive assistant to the head of LIUNA, the private sector union, got a parcel of land removed. From the Green
when Joe Mancinelli explained to me why he was supporting Ford in 2018, he didn't bring that up.
He didn't raise that? He didn't raise that?
No, he didn't.
And then there's the MZOs, which are coming out. So I know Kory's going to go wind up. But I just think you can see a steady river of future controversy that relates and embellishes the broader narrative of it ain't for the people, it's for some people. And there's this insider play. So I don't think that you can dunk the ball right now because this just seems like there's lots more to the story. The question is going to be whether or not the next election is about integrity. I don't really I'm not convinced it will be, but I'm starting to be persuaded that Ford's going to have to consistently deal with this, and it could affect and fundamentally alter his brand. That's the real fear. I didn't expect them to completely collapse in the polls, remain collapsed in the polls, particularly because you got no opposition, and the opposition haven't sorted out their primary yet.
Well, what do you mean you have no opposition?
No opposition. What are you talking about?
What do you mean you have no opposition?
Because the two parties are still at 25% each, and they're fighting one another.
That says something about them too, surely.
No, but one of them is going to emerge from the pack. So we'll see, Bonnie or whomever gets elected Liberal leader, and then we'll sort of see how they square off against Marit and who pulls ahead, who eats the other's 25, and then we'll sort of see. But look, I think, it speaks to the durability of his brand that he pops back up the second he's done that barrage. But I don't think I would count on, if I was conservative, that it's absolutely eternal.
No, maybe not, Jordan, but it does appear as though people don't really want to change the government in Ontario. They wish Ford would be better at times. But, and their poll numbers will fall when something like the Greenbelt happens or long-term care happens, but they bounce back. I mean, it's the default position still.
Yeah, I think we also have to remember we're not anywhere close to an election here. So that also factors into how people are thinking about this. And, if I were the Conservatives, I would be encouraged by this rebound. And I think we can't talk about it without talking about some of the issues management that finally happened on the Greenbelt as being tied to allowing that rebound to come about, right? So it took the Ford government perhaps an uncharacteristically long time. Who knows? Maybe Kory's honeymoon had something to do with it. To cut bait on some of
it was a raspberry beret.
There you go. We're missing it, Kory. Bring it back.
I've got a mustard colored one too. Yeah.
But when they finally did, and they cut and they managed to oust those involved, like it was a fairly clean cut. The walk back was, and I think you can expect a bit of a change when you try to correct course as quickly and as fully as they did. But if I were them, I would be worried about what this does, not so much to the Ford brand among people who have voted Liberal and New Democrat in the past, but among previous Conservative voters. Does this turn off people who came out to support Ford because they felt like he was doing an authentic kind of politics that represented them? Are they going to feel like coming out again, or are they going to feel like staying home? And I think that Scott's right to point to the fact that it's not one damning event that's going to cement that for people or not, but it's it's the repetition of the hit on the exact same vulnerable spot for Ford that's really dangerous. And looking ahead, we can see that there's other opportunities for this story to be told by the opposition, right? So you've got MZOs, you've got still continuing to pick at the Greenbelt with stories like what we saw today. You've got Ford's personal phone records that, the opposition are taking a run at as well. Of course, whatever happens with the criminal investigation. So this is going to be coming up again and again, even if you just look at the basket of issues that we currently know about, and we can bet that there's probably more out there, right? There's going to be a pretty sustained diet of this stuff for the opposition. Now, when it comes to the opposition, I think there's also no question that right now, Ford is facing, on the one hand with the NDP, Mart is still finding her feet. They've managed to wrap themselves around the axle on the Israel-Gaza issue over the last couple of weeks that has harmed their ability to capitalize on this. And then, of course, Liberals are embroiled in a leadership race, which is never exactly the best time to be taking on your governing opponent. But there will be a progressive primary after that, and there will be some consolidation. And I think that that's when we may see a bit more of a concerted effort and attack against Ford, where some of this stuff might come to stick. But yeah, no question. This is probably these are much happier poll numbers for the Ford government than they were a month ago.
I bet if they ever get Doug Ford's phone records, they're going to discover that every single call is to Chipotle. That's my personal theory.
Kory,
what do you have against Chick-fil-A?
Kory, do you see it like I do, that basically there's 40% who are sticking pretty loyally to Ford and the PCs as long as the government gets out of its own fucking way?
Yeah, I think my two colleagues sort of dodged the question a little bit as to why the rebound. It's not like, well, what things could still go wrong in the future, but why the rebound? And I think it's fairly straightforward. People like it when they don't have to wait till the next election to have you pivot and course correct. Like, it's popular. It's popular to do it, and some politicians are better able to pull off that maneuver than others. But if Doug Ford has one superpower, that's it. And that's what the one is. And it's the ability to say, oh gosh, we got that wrong, and we're gonna change it and do it with credibility, and then actually go about doing it. I think, you point to other things that are coming in the future. Yeah, there's obviously other threads to the storyline, but it's really the same story, and it's the same storyline. There's, a host of decisions that are being reviewed right now, whether it's changes to city plans, whether it's MZOs, all of it. And, where the process was fucked up, it's going to get reversed. And there's no other alternative to that. You can't say, oh, this was messed up with the Greenbelt, but, any other occasions where something was messed up, you're not going to change it. Like, you got to fully embrace that approach or not. And your ability to actually withstand it and to have that Teflon you're talking about is actually, it's determined by how thorough your follow through is in terms of the course correction. If it seems half-hearted and partial, you're going to have a lot of trouble. I don't think an apology that didn't fully reverse the Greenbelt changes would have worked. I think, you had to do the whole thing. And I think you got to kind of carry it through to all the other elements of this thing if you want to have it be credible with folks. Jordan touched on Merit Styles problems. I actually think that's part of this too, in terms of the rebound. There's nothing like looking at your opponent and having them, kind of be in disarray to help the incumbent party. And when you look at Merit Styles' week, the past week, it was terrible. Like, she was sputtering. She was, telling the government to go fuck off in question period, which I don't think really got coverage, but that was happening. She really lost her composure and lost her cool, and was having to deal with a bit of a mini revolt within her own caucus. So, I think all of that disarray probably assisted as well. At the end of the day, it's a comparison between the various leaders, not just looking at one in isolation. And so when they're not doing as well, that's helpful.
Well, let's pick that up, Jordan, and come right back to the opposition, because there's when you look at polls that measure personal favorability, Ford actually doesn't do that well. Like, he's running ahead of his own popularity, to be honest, right? There's lots of critics out there who are still opting to support this government over the alternatives. And that says a lot about the alternatives. And I don't accept the alternatives' excuses. Like, you take the Liberals, there's lots of times when parties increase their popularity during leadership races. In fact, it used to be a truism that you increased your popularity during leadership races. And Stiles has had, a free run for quite a while on this. People must be coming to a judgment about the Liberals and NDP as well as Ford when they make these voting decisions.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you. I think that at times, we and I say that we political strategists or people who comment on this make the assumption that people aren't listening between elections, and that isn't true. Like, we know now, people really are looking. It's almost as though they're watching TV with the sound off. They are forming impressions about leaders and about parties with the information that they're getting, even if they're not actively seeking out news about politics because it's unpleasant. So I do think that, Marit has had a terrible 2 weeks, and that's not helpful for her. And we know that one of the things that really prevented the Ontario NDP from closing the deal in 2018 was a perception that they weren't mainstream, and a perception that they weren't acceptable to a large block of middle of the road voters. And I know that there's going to be many in the party who don't like to hear that, but that's the truth of what happened there. And so I think, she's got some decisions to make about how she wants to grapple with these issues internally with her team. But, the Liberals are also, I think they're in an interesting position. So they've got a leadership race, which they've trumpeted as an advantage over the NDP, where Marit was acclaimed. But I don't know that has really been an advantage for them. The more people are seeing of Bonnie Crombie, the more it's looking like she's a lot more of the same in terms of being connected to developers and being in the pockets of those interests. And she's not exactly proving herself to be deft on some of these important questions that are coming out. And so she's taking on fire, even as the front runner, as this race goes on. And I think that the impressions that people are forming of her now will follow her, of course, should she win the leadership. So the race that the Liberals were so excited to have, I'm not sure that it's actually turning into a benefit for them, because they're going to end up selecting a leader who's taken on probably a fair amount of damage herself over the course of this race, and with a lot of the same negatives that might be sticking to Ford if the opposition is lucky.
Attention, you hurly-burlyites, with your curious minds and sterling short-term memories. Incidentally, I do not put myself in that latter category anymore. I'm curious, all right. It's just sometimes I can't remember what I'm curious about. So here's a recap of what I talked about last week, mainly for me. The digital transformation of industry in Canada, how it can help us achieve our climate goals by lowering greenhouse gases, and how this transformation won't be possible without continued investment into world-class networks to power the coming raft of technologies. Here's an excellent example of precisely that: Next Generation 911. You know how it works now. With today's 911, we generally make voice calls to emergency services. In some very limited cases, text messages. Useful, yes. But imagine scenarios involving people with hearing impairments. Those calls take far more time. It's stressful, to say the least, and potentially ruinous to a positive outcome. TELUS Next Gen 911 has begun its initial rollout in BC and Alberta. It'll take a little time, but by the end of next year, people in crisis situations will be able to reach emergency services via video connection and share medical documents and upload images. Callers will also be able to message first responders via real-time text. It's a massive step change, because these are the kinds of capabilities that increase the breadth and depth of communication in the most critical moments. For people with disabilities, the result will be faster response times, plus the more accurate deployment of services because of richer information. Next Gen 911 will also improve public safety because of the significant added capacity for high call volumes. Next Gen 911 will also improve public safety because of the significant added capacity for high call volumes during large-scale emergencies. Wildfires and other climate emergencies ain't a blip. More to come next year. Hurly-burlyites, these transformative technologies are only possible when our homegrown telcos commit to continuous investment in their networks. TELUS does. Most recently, $81 billion additional dollars into infrastructure, operations, and spectrum. But that's only possible with continued support from government. And like I said last week, a legislative and regulatory environment that allows for those massive investments to make fiscal sense. Scott, there's a big development that's going to happen for the provincial Liberals before the next election. And that is the defeat of the federal Liberals.
Yeah.
And that's got to be a big problem for them right now. Like, the federal numbers in Ontario are really bad. Really bad. I was talking to Philippe Fournier, and other than Toronto, the Liberals are just getting wiped across the map in Ontario by Poilievre right now. And so that's got to be depressing Liberal provincial numbers as well.
I would think, and everybody talks about the Queen's Park, Ottawa substitute theory and alternation theory and all that kind of stuff.
No, I don't mean that. I just mean Trudeau's unpopular.
No, I know you don't. But
Yeah.
I'm saying that notwithstanding that, the truth of the matter is that the Liberal brand is taking a beating right now, right? The Trudeau government looks tired and his numbers are down. And as you say, the federal Conservatives are on the march and all that. And the deal hasn't been the deal hasn't been prosecuted on Ford, much less closed. And so this stuff is unhelpful to Ford. I do think that it is scales on the dragon's hide. So a few have been chipped off, a few more are likely to be chipped off, but someone's still got to fire the bolt that pierces the skin. And so, the Liberals are going to have to distinguish themselves in the province after they've got a new leader. Let's say it's Bonnie, and she's going to have to be really, really, really consistent in saying, suburban voters can trust me. Suburban voters can trust me. Suburban voters can trust me. I really think it's vital that they get those 905 votes. I mean, that's, textbook stuff, but I really think right now, there's a threat for the Liberals. You've got the federal Liberals are depressing your overall vote in appeal. You've got a downtown Toronto, a 416, that the NDP have big, strong tentacles all around, right? And then you got a 905 in rural areas that appear to be locked out from you by the likes of Ford. And so you're going to have to pick some battleground. You're going to have to try to compete in the 905, in suburbia, in the Guelphs, the Kitcheners, the Ottawas, and then hope that allows you to springboard and consolidate the 416. And, so there's a lot of pieces to that puzzle. But all I would say is that obviously the deal's got to be cemented by the other guys. But Ford is having trouble. And the fact that his numbers rebounded instantly doesn't mean that those troubles aren't there and they're not going to be persistent. I think this MZO thing is going to be an ongoing train wreck for the government. I think that it is going to have a defining characteristic to it in terms of the quality and the character of the government. And I just think that's going to be difficult. And, the question is going to be, can one of or both of, or certainly one of these opposition parties leverage that and maximize the benefit of it? And the answer is, we don't know.
Well, if the zeitgeist of the Liberal Party is around this strategy of having a narrative of the next election be around ethics and development, then I think it bodes very poorly for Bonnie Crombie winning the leadership. Because like the only person amongst that field who's going to have a hell of a time prosecuting that case is her, because her relationships are so deep and so long-standing with all the same people.
I'm not arguing that.
I'm not arguing that. Developers, it's the same group of people.
I'm saying soak up all the gravy of the grief that Ford is getting from this issue. I don't think the election's going to be about ethics in the next thing. I think you just maximize the benefit of his pain, and you got to make it about something else that's on your. And fundamentally, one of the opposition parties has got to have an economic message that seems appealing in that election cycle, or are they going to get beat again?
Well, this is fundamentally, I think, where the resiliency of the Ford's numbers are right now. When you look at just the do you like them or not number, it's never as favorable. But if you actually look at who do you trust on the economy, who do you trust on affordability, who do you trust on getting
relative to others,
you're saying,
yeah.
And and then he scores off the charts on those economic issues. Who's going to reindustrialize southwestern Ontario? Who's going to train skilled workers? Like, when you go through on an issue basis, he does exceedingly well against his opponents. So I think that's probably more the case. And I think that's kind of what you're getting at, Scott, is you got to kind of get some traction in some of these other issue areas, or you got to change the lens to something that isn't those economic things where you're behind on. So you got to shift the focus to education and healthcare or the environment or something else. But as long as he maintains those kinds of double-digit leads around the economic side of things, I think it's really challenging for anyone else. Because, I think we are probably in a slow slide into a recession right now. Bad news for incumbent governments generally, but not necessarily so, not universally so. Especially if the focal point on that happening is largely at the federal realm as a result of rising interest rates and inflation.
One thing that's just
right. Sorry. I just say I think he's right about shifting issue sets, but I think we should also circle that Ford remains potentially vulnerable on the issue of healthcare as people are experiencing dysfunction in ERs, in access to doctors, all of these things. It's becoming acute again. We're heading into another respiratory illness season where you're going to see overflowing 13-hour, 20-hour ER waits. And I think that the unspent money that the Ford government is sitting on is a vulnerability there for them when people are really confronted with dysfunction in the healthcare system. But again, you need a party there that's going to be focusing and prosecuting that case.
I don't think you're going to see a lot of unspent money in any provincial government for the next while, because I think as the economy slows, revenues are going to be squeezed even more. And you're also seeing rising labor costs within the public service, which, whether you agree with that or disagree with that or whatever the case may be, that's happening. And so, every time you raise wages within the public service at another percent, out the door go, 10 or whatever number of billions of dollars. So over the course of the contract.
Right, but when when you arbitrarily cap the wages too, out go the nurses.
Yeah,
so.
well, but that was right. But I think on the health, I agree with you on healthcare. That's going to be a tough issue for every province, but particularly Ontario. And the reason is the rate of growth of population in the province. Like, you have some parts of the province that are growing at an astounding rate. Peel region being one of them. And I would argue they've been underserved for a long time in terms of the number of hospital beds per capita, et cetera. And so as you add more and more people to those regions, those problems become more and more and more acute. So it's going to put a lot of pressure on the system. It is already.
So I've been thinking about all these new weather terms brought to us by climate change. I mean, Colorado lows and Arctic highs and Alberta clippers are still around. But they're yesterday's bagels. The new stuff is way worse. At first, I thought a polar vortex was a snowmobile. It is, in fact, a weather system rotating around the North Pole that can wobble and send air south that's so severely cold, frostbite happens within about 10 minutes of unprotected exposure. Or atmospheric rivers. We found out about those when one formed off the west coast a couple of years ago, funneling biblical amounts of rain onto the lower mainland, washing out roads and railway lines, turning Vancouver into an island. Now they're a regular occurrence. The first one hit the coast last week. There are even atmospheric lakes. Seriously, that's a new term. They break off from atmospheric rivers and wander off to drench other areas. We now have flash droughts. We have gray swans, extremely rare events, as opposed to black swans, which are unprecedented. The 2021 heat wave out west was a gray swan. Thing is, they're less and less rare. There's weather whiplash. That's, for example, severe flooding followed by record-breaking heat. Again, see British Columbia 2 years ago. Disastrous flooding, then a lethal heat dome with some of the hottest temperatures on Earth. Bomb cyclones, firenadoes, derechos, freaky stuff, except it's not. Our client CN has spent a fortune on technology and training to cope with these phenomena. Because, as I'm constantly saying, trains simply must keep moving. But the job can feel Sisyphean. You know, the guy in the myth who spent all his time rolling a boulder uphill. A small example. CN is the principal mover of grain out of Canada's prairies. Millions of tons a year. But grain cannot be loaded onto a ship in the rain. At the Port of Vancouver, trains loaded with grain are increasingly sitting idle, choking up the entire system, because grain terminals have not made the necessary overhead modifications to keep grain dry during transfer to a ship. It has to be a group effort, folks. Severe is here, and if our supply chains don't adapt, believe me, we will all pay the price. All right.
I'm just going to make one broad observation, which is, man, it's hard for opposition parties at the provincial level. Like, seriously, like if your thesis isn't, and it couldn't be, it can't be, it's not responsible for your thesis to be, I'll wait until the campaign and see if I catch fire, right? Like, you got to do other things. You can't just do that. But in the truth of the matter is, so, okay, you fundraise.
This is only true in Ontario, by the way. Opposition leaders have good profile everywhere else. It's just in Ontario where provincial politics is like the third order of government that gets covered by anything.
I guess that's true. You know, I only live in Ontario.
Well, you need,
but it's brutal. There's no media.
Well, you need paid media. Like there's no alternative to paid media, and I think you're seeing it at the federal level too. You know, if what is one of the most animating things about Poilievre's success over the last number of months? Yes, he's had great message discipline. Yes, I think he's on the right topic set. But yes, he's also doing fucking advertising.
Almost as much as the Rolling Stones.
And, you know, I think it's so difficult in today's media environment. Yeah, well, look, look at the news ratings now. There's more people watching fucking Paw Patrol than tuning into CBC National every week.
Yeah, I can attest.
It's largely irrelevant what's going on what used to be the anchor newscasts.
Well, now that Rex Murphy is on Paw Patrol.
Yeah, right?
Right.
Which one is he?
He's Barky. He's fucking Barky.
Police state everywhere. My God.
He's Barky. He's a round up all the lefty kittens and put them in a burlap
We don't watch
bag.
that shit in our house.
But there's like something to this. It's a dual thing of declining ratings, but it's also, whether it's your intention or not, everyone is living in an increasingly self-curated media environment, thanks to social media and various algorithms around what gets presented to you, whether it's through Google.
So you got to force your way in there.
You got to force it. You got to buy your way in.
And most people don't want to listen to political news.
Yeah.
It has been deliberately made confrontational and unpleasant, and it turns people off.
Yeah, so
I don't think there's a more important observation about politics right now. It's just impossible to be heard because none of the channels that used to work, including for the past decade, Twitter, social media platforms that people sort of engaged on, those things are dying also. People are not buying into it. They're not even self-curating on that stuff. And so the only way to get in is to smash away through into people's households who are 55 and above by buying time on fucking Jeopardy or sports programs.
I repeat, Brian Topp said to me on the podcast after the Alberta election that they were not able to communicate anything through earned media, that there was none of their messages that they tried through earned media that people had absorbed. And the only things that people knew about the NDP campaign was what they had paid for people to know.
Yeah, I think we're going to get more into
podcasts.
that.
Let's be clear. Podcasts are rising like a dot, okay?
Man.
Well, we're going to get into this, I think, probably with the Apple stuff. But when you look at what people actually connect with and which parties have had relative strengths in this area, it favors the Conservatives today, because Conservatives have long felt that they haven't had a fair shake with the earned media and those sort of main establishment legacy media outlets. This is not a new gripe from Conservatives, but it's, I think, also led them to be the first on the bandwagon in terms of these alternative approaches to reaching people, born out of necessity as much as anything else. And I think, you know, the field has changed such that now that is the primary way of getting in touch with people and connecting with people. And you see the other two parties playing, to a certain degree, catch up.
Our desire to present horseshit as truth drove us to find other invented mechanisms to communicate with people. And now everybody's using those.
Well, you can have that value spin put on it all you want, but it doesn't change the fact that...
Let's go to the orchard. Let's go to the orchard, because it's interesting. So our clipping today comes from Colby Kosh, the Nashville Post. And the excerpt I'm going to read to you goes like this. I'm reasonably sure that Don...
Like what? Like what? Suck my prick.
I'm reasonably sure that Don Urquhart, editor of the Times Chronicle newspaper in the South Okanagan, is not a cretin. Unfortunately, this week he is playing one very convincingly on the internet for an audience of millions, and he cast himself in the part. Many of my social media watching readers will have already seen his Oscar-worthy moment of all-Canadian cringe at a photo op with Pierre Poilievre, leader of the federal Conservatives. As Poilievre calmly gnaws on a locally grown apple, Urquhart tries, with increasing desperation, to formulate a coherent interview question. The Poilievre apple clip is doing smash numbers around the world with conservative Facebookers and Twitterers, and is being studied closely as an example of political jiu-jitsu, with the subtle element of prop comedy emphasized. Kory, what works about this for Poilievre?
Well, a bunch of things, I think. One, it's his demeanor. I think the calmness, like he doesn't look flapped. He's just sort of almost enjoying the experience. I also got to just say, can I just say, I wish Sun News was still on the air to be able to play with that clip and have fun with it. We would have given anything back then to have something that good to work with. But look, it plays to a stereotype around very opinionated journalism, because like what is the reporter doing? He's like trying to roll out a narrative that is very political. It's also sort of self-contradictory. Like either he's an absolutely amoral sociopath who's manipulating the public with his clever ways, or he's a ardent ideologue who is imposing agenda no matter what anyone else says or thinks. Like you got to pick which one of those horses you're going to ride, but trying to actually meld them both into one horse doesn't really work. So like I think it's like a bunch of shitty arguments with a very smart-assy political tone to the questioning, and you've got him just sort of like shaking his head and being non-fluxed about it. So like there'll be people who don't like it. I certainly saw some commentary of folks who thought this was a terrible thing for him, but I would say that the numbers and everything else would indicate quite the opposite. Like it's something that's connected, and it's something that feeds into a narrative that that's largely helpful to Poilievre. So I think it was a 10 out of 10 in my view.
Scott, bring your apple back, because Kory says that he was relaxed, which he was relaxed, I guess, but it was an edgy exchange. And Poilievre was expressing disdain for the reporter throughout the interview in his attitude, and disdain's maybe mild, maybe even contempt for the reporter. And I'm tempted to look at that thing and say, do people really like that attitude? But when I really look inside myself, I think guys do like that attitude that he was showing. I think that was good for him.
I think we're guilty. And I certainly think Colby Kosh, the hysterical limit, are guilty of overanalyzing. He was dunking on somebody who was weak. The guy was, and I don't mean that as like, oh my God, he's being a bully. I mean, the guy presented himself weakly. So first of all, yes, it's going to go viral because he looks like a cock and he's being a cock, and cockery is something he's outstanding at. So he's 10 out of 10. Degree of difficulty, 0. Execution, 10 out of 10. But the real thing about it is, yeah, like if you like him, you love it. It's a traditional story, right? You love the way he's being a dink, and it plays into all those sort of stuff. But only people that love it. To me, the real thing is how weak, how utterly pathetic and inarticulate and unable to prosecute his principal point the so-called journalist is. And I shouldn't say so-called journalist. I don't know if he's a real journalist or not a real journalist or whatever, but I'm going to read a couple of quotes from him. Okay. So you tell me. So listen to this. Left wing, this and that. Right wing, it's that type of. So that's one thing. Here's another thing. In terms of turning things quite dramatically, in terms of Trudeau and the left wing and all of this, you make it's quite a play that you make on it. So I'm just wondering, wow, That's real Edward R. Murrow shit there, right? So, if you're going to run at somebody like Poilievre, who's a polished political performer and standing there eating an apple, which is like the Muhammad Ali equivalent of laying on the ropes and ready to come out and just pound you in the fucking head, you'd better be precise and specific. Like, you're going to come at that guy, come at the guy hard. So that when he says, well, like what? You go, well, like this and this and this and this and this. And don't have some general bland, to be ironically ideological assertion. Have a hard question with specific examples and run at the guy. So I just think this was dunking on an 8-foot net. I think it's, causing the Colby Koshes and a bunch of people online who are already right wing to jerk themselves raw. And I don't think it matters a damn. And I don't think that he looks good. And I don't think that Republicans who are having a hoot and a holler about how great it is, but yet can't elect a fucking speaker in the House of Representatives matter a damn either. I just think the whole thing is wildly distorted in terms of significance. And I just think he looks like a cock.
All right. Well, Jordan, I won't ask you to comment on the last piece necessarily of that, but
penises flying left, right, and center here.
Last week we had penis envy. Anyway,
that's right.
What I want to ask you is to pick up on where both Scott and Kory were going, in part because one of the things that made this viral is not Poilievre's behavior on it; it's the journalist's behavior on it, and because for the conservative element of society, that reporter was a stand-in for the mainstream media. And his questions were a stand-in for the kind of perceived lazy ideological bias against the conservatives that can't even be formulated into a precise question. It's just so obviously there.
Right.
Yeah,
this is a favorite kind of victimhood, I think, on the right and particularly in Canada and particularly for this leader. This is the same guy who's out there complaining night and day about CBC as though they're an arm of the Liberal government, right? So this is a well-trod path in terms of victimization from the media that the Conservatives really like to spend time on. And so I don't see it as different from that. I think, look, what was the journalist underprepared? There's no question. But at the same time, like, we just finished a conversation where we talked about the complete dearth of actual deep political coverage from provincial media in Canada's largest province. So let's talk about a guy who covers, a sub-region in BC and, writes stories about the opening of stores and other shit like that, and also has to cover Poilievre. So I think to a large degree here, obviously he's punching down, and that I think, and just in a way that just drips with contempt. And actually, I know that Colby Kosh is our clipping, but it would be malpractice not to mention Shannon Proudfoot's excellent column on this, and particularly the line that characterizes Pierre as appearing like a theatrically bored horse, which was just really, really excellent there.
Beautiful.
But I think,
Ed the talking horse.
Theatrically bored horse. But look, I mean, Scott's right. If people love it, they were already going to love it. And I almost guarantee you that the only people who love it are men who are existing in this right-wing memeified social media space. To me, what really strikes me about both the popularity of this clip in that universe and also, most interestingly, the Conservative Party's use and pushing of this clip is how it contrasts with the ads that they just spent more than $3 million pushing out the door this summer in order to recast Poilievre as warm, as approachable for women, as softening those rough edges. And this is the exact opposite of that. So to me, this is just more wanking, and it's contradictory to something that they have spent a ton of money on. It doesn't make any sense. I think it makes them feel good internally, but strategically, I think it's idiotic.
You've heard me raise one of my hobby horses, long-term care, on the podcast before. But another aspect of our healthcare system we tend not to discuss is palliative care. Palliative care gives people comfort, dignity, and control when they're facing a serious illness. It's about improving quality of life for people and their loved ones while they are on their journey no matter where it takes them. On October 25th, our sponsor, the Canadian Cancer Society, will be releasing a new report on the state of palliative care in Canada. The report found we have just over half the hospice beds we ought to in this country, and we lack the workforce we need to offer the compassionate, person-centered care people expect. But it also shows the progress being made and where we need to keep going from here. The Canadian Cancer Society believes everyone in Canada should have access to affordable, culturally safer, high-quality palliative care, no matter where you live or where you choose to receive care. To learn more, go to www.cancer.ca/palliative care. All right, well, let's move on. We seem to have cored the apple. Let's move on to a difficult subject, I say, which is Trudeau in the hospital. So last Tuesday, it was reported that an Israeli missile had hit a hospital in Gaza, killing 500 people. Trudeau immediately condemned it, and while he didn't name Israel, it was pretty clear who he had in mind. It has subsequently become clear that the hospital was never hit, and it's likely a backfiring Hamas rocket hit a hospital parking lot. Now, this was all clear and accepted by world leaders last week, but it took until yesterday for the government under Minister Blair to issue a statement walking the initial Trudeau statement back. Jordan, what went on here?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is emblematic of a lot of the difficulties of getting clear, quick, and reliable information out of conflict zones today. I have some empathy for the government on this one. It's you saw major media outlets also have to walk back stories on this. So, Trudeau was kind of far from the only one on this. I think things like this are going to happen in the fog of war, if you will, and particularly in a place where there's limited media coverage on the ground. I think what's important is that, politicians need to not make a rush to judgment. They need to wait as much as possible to get the facts because there's a real danger in misinformation. And we saw the cost of that this week, which was
a hell of an allegation. It's a hell of an allegation.
Yeah. And I think, the timing of it did real damage to some, efforts that Biden was making during his visit there. There were meetings with the boss and others that were canceled as a result of this story that did not come back. And, that might have closed off a window for some other types of progress in de-escalating the situation. So this stuff has consequences. I mean, I think what I was really struck by was that while Canada wasn't the only country to take some time to confirm, the Liberals didn't necessarily do a great job of explaining what was happening. So, for example, it wasn't really clear that Canada was doing its own analysis, really, until Bill Blair brought it out at 10 o'clock on Friday night. So I think that was a bit of a strange way to try to cap off the issue. And at the end of the day, look, do we want Canada to be doing its own analysis of these things? Yeah, I mean, probably. But also, what are we analyzing? We don't have people on the ground there. We're analyzing Five Eyes intelligence. We're analyzing Israeli satellite imagery. So, it's all the same stuff that our other allies are analyzing. So, you have to wonder about what the value added in taking 2 full extra days when others had already come to that position would be for the government. So I think
everybody knows we're authoritative on these matters.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think we like to pretend like maybe we have more to say on it than we actually do. But at the same time, it's still a significant incident, regardless at the end of the day of the cause of it, the story about the cause of it, about it being an Israeli missile took off and has altered events already. So this is also the moment we live in, right? Where that kind of misinformation getting out and getting traction and affecting global geopolitical decisions has huge ramifications. So I think it's a cautionary tale really for all politicians in terms of rendering judgment.
Well, sure, it's cautionary in one respect. I mean, don't believe a fucking word Hamas says. Isn't that one of the things to believe about that? I mean, they made up the biggest lie possible.
Well, like, yeah, but that shouldn't be something you need a learning on, right? Like, moments after this alleged incident happened, Hamas comes out and says, oh, it was Israel and there are 500 dead. Not 497, not 522, like 500. It's 500, and like the thing just exploded, and that's what it is. Yeah, it's shame on some major media outlets like the New York Times who jumped on it right away without any other information, and it's shame on Canada for doing the same. Lots of other countries exercised caution, and we didn't. And lots of other countries came out with what the right answer was on this after a rapid review of information available. And Canada didn't. And we also had the government put out the prime minister on it. It's not like this came from a cabinet minister. No, the retraction came at 10 p.m. on a Friday night by Bill Blair, not exactly the fucking comms genius of the Trudeau government. Like that, I can't think of a more obvious attempt to bury the retraction than having Bill Blair go out at 10 p.m. at night. So I think it's shameful for the government. I hope they've learned something from this, but it shouldn't be a learning that they have to go through this to experience. That rushing out with Hamas information quickly on something this superheated is not just ill-advised. It's reckless. It's reckless and inappropriate.
Hey, Scott, give us a little seminar here. You've been at DCOMS in a Liberal PMO. What are the pressures that they were feeling last Tuesday, and how do you think this went down?
I'm super anxious to answer that question because it forces you to assign motivation and to make assumptions that we don't know. And some of those assumptions are not very pleasant. So they didn't put the PM out. The PM was out. So he gets scrubbed. Just a slight distinction. And it matters because...
They put out that tweet. Like that wasn't the PM out. Like he actually controls his Twitter account last time I checked.
No, that's fair. But he was out fast and he was available. And the premise of the question that was posed to him very clearly assigned responsibility to Israel, and he didn't dispute that. And I think to a certain degree, if you look at it carefully, and if you then look at the context of how things have unfolded since, he almost seemed grateful for the opportunity to introduce what I think from his perspective or the government's perspective might have been some welcome balance, because they'd been so forceful, against Hamas and on the side of Israel. And I think they're probably getting some internal heat. We've seen the letter from a bunch of Liberal MPs. We know what the constituency and the diaspora politics and how intense they are around this question. And so it looked to me almost like, instead of instinctively saying, whoa, let's slow down and say we need to find out more about what the source of this is. It's like, hey, the New York Times is tweeting. The New York Times has issued effectively an apology. It's issued an editor's note breaking down what occurred and why it occurred. So they're sort of like, phew, let's do this. So that's mistake number one, is you shouldn't jump on something that significant in the heat of that. And you certainly ought not to be guided by, this is actually news that might allow us to triangulate this incredibly delicate domestic and international political situation. And then I think there's a very deliberate decision to just sort of slow foot the reply and the correction on it, right? And okay, so let's be absolutely certain. I mean, why would an American intelligence be good enough? And if not, then explain that. And then what intelligence was there in addition to the American intelligence or Five Eyes that was shared with us that allowed us a week later to come to the conclusion, or days later to come to the conclusion that, all right, now we don't think that Israel was responsible, and it was in fact Hamas. So all of that makes me very uncomfortable because it leads me to think that they're looking at this through the lens of, let's try to introduce some balance into this. And I will tell you this, my view, I said this on TV yesterday with Kory, political communication absolutely relies on clarity. And it was crystal unclear what was being said. It looked like you were trying to both sides this issue. On the one hand, on the other hand, I don't think it's an issue where you can do that very effectively. I think it ended up in a situation where now the Jewish community domestically is really, really enraged and hurt. and untrustful now, mistrustful of the Liberal brand at the federal level. And I think that is going to have some significant lingering consequence. And I don't think it's enough to have all those who have listened to the government say, we're standing forcefully behind Israel and we defend their right to defend themselves. And it's not enough to persuade them. So you're in the worst of all possible worlds politically. Final thing I would say is I actually think from a geopolitical stance, and yes, we're not the United States, and Jordan is right. Sometimes we overestimate our authority. But if you wish to have genuine authority and genuine influence on this question, better to take a forceful position in public in favor of Israel so that you increase your ability diplomatically behind the scenes, like Biden has. And obviously Biden has firepower of a whole other order beyond belief. But you enrich your ability behind the scenes to say, guys, let's establish this corridor. We know that Joly was desperately arguing for that really early on the ground in the region, arguing for a humanitarian corridor. We know that the United States and others have been arguing, hold off on the ground incursion from Israel, because we know what is unleashed by that is unknowable and could really mushroom out of control. Your ability to influence that discussion, participate in it, be heard, all relies on your ability to say, and listen, for Christ's sake, I'm taking grief politically at home and in public because I've been so forceful in favor of Israel and you. So listen to me when I say, please, please play your cards with some care. But we surrendered that ability.
Jordan,
this all makes. Sorry, can I just jump in on this? Because I think this is not a mysterious situation when you view it through the lens of internal politics within the Liberal caucus and within the Liberal voter coalition. I think it's exactly what Scott was referring to. Like the desire to jump out quickly on this narrative was to try to provide that balance, and the hesitancy to walk it back was to try to not face the criticism that they're going to get. Like I don't know if you guys saw the clip of Trudeau
Can I interject something here, Kory?
It's pretty jarring.
Let me interject something here. I think that there's a big element of the politics we're missing in this conversation. And that is, we're talking about the diaspora politics and the pressures on the Liberal coalition from that perspective. But when you look at the national polls these days, the Liberals are going to win half their seats in Quebec, almost half of their seats in Quebec in the next election.
Yep.
And they are holding on to a substantial share of the vote and a substantial number of seats in Quebec at a time when they are getting blasted everywhere else. And we all know that the politics of this in Quebec are radically different than the politics of this in the rest of the country. Not only is there less sympathy for Israel than maybe for Jewish people in Quebec, but there's a lot more sympathy for the Palestinian cause than there is in the rest of Canada.
Including Trudeau's own riding, right? There's a substantial Muslim population within its own riding. He's faced controversies in the past around campaigning at Wahhabist mosques, et cetera, et cetera. And,
but it isn't just Muslims in Quebec, Kory.
Yeah, I know it isn't. There's a deep and ugly vein of xenophobia and sort of endorsement of a pure land view of Quebec that Legault has tapped into repeatedly to his political success. Like there is a there when it comes to this kind of baiting around issues around religion and race, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Like it's ugly stuff. But playing footsie with that is, I think, in violation of the longest standing traditions of the Liberal Party and the values that a lot of people who have supported the Liberal Party over the years hold dear. Like, I think that kind of stuff is pretty repugnant to a lot of people in the 905 who vote for the Liberal Party, for instance. And I don't know how you square that circle. And we've seen them try to square it before in terms of reaction to reasonable accommodation measures that Legault has brought in. I'm sure Pierre Trudeau Sr. is spinning in his grave looking at the inaction and silence on those issues that his son and his government have expressed over time.
Pirouetting in his grave.
Yes,
he wouldn't be spinning; he would be pirouetting in his grave.
Pirouetting with a rose.
Jordan, you have looked sad through this whole conversation.
Yeah, I'm not fucking sad about this. I'm fucking sad about all of this. It's awful, and it's going to get so much worse. And I think I don't know. I mean, I guess I have two thoughts. One maybe crass, and one idealistic. But the first is that if the Liberals were viewing this issue as by slow walking it back as somehow a place to try to address tensions within their own caucus on the conflict, that was a really unwise choice. And for the simple reason that this was an incident that they had early indications was likely going to be ruled to be not Israel's fault. So why would you slow walk back something that you are just going to end up being on the wrong side of? It doesn't make any sense. So I also would hesitate to ascribe that motivation to it, because I think it really is illogical. Maybe that's what happened. Maybe it's not. We don't know. We don't know that. But the other thing I want to say is that I just think that the notion that political leaders in Canada of any party want to kind of import the dynamics of this conflict whole cloth and map that on to the Jewish and Arab communities in Canada is so incredibly dangerous. It is so dangerous, and it is actually the exact opposite of what we really need to see from people at the moment. I think that there's an opportunity for leaders to speak to the need for the Jewish community in Canada, for the Palestinian community in Canada, for Muslims in Canada to feel safe where many do not right now. We are seeing a massive increase in the number of hate crimes against Muslims, against Jewish people. Anti-Semitic attacks are up all around the world. And this is something that we actually can do things about here in Canada. So I get real worried when we start to see people trying to make a direct mapping on of that conflict here in Canada. I think it's irresponsible, and I think it's incredibly dangerous.
Awesome. All right. Maybe it's time for the Hey Yous. What do you think? You guys ready for a Hey Yous?
Good stuff.
All right, Gordon.
Yeah.
Do it. Bring it home.
Ladies and gentlemen, please return to your seats. The Hey Yous are about to begin.
Okay, who's got one?
I think we all do. But
Yeah.
do you want me to go first?
Sure, go first.
I want to do it to Speaker Greg Fergus, because we didn't talk about this today, but he attempted to do a speech on decorum during question period, which I think was quite provocative, as we saw, and resulted in a loss of decorum by choosing to make those remarks at that time and in that way. And, I think the criticism that the Conservatives brought forward around the decision to do that, I think is bang on. And it was broad-based. It was sort of from all corners of the party and all corners of that caucus, from sort of the most ardent right-wing folks to sort of centrists, like across the board, and all for the same reason, that, it's hard to say that you want to follow the rules of the House closely while violating the rules of the House. Lots of things that I would probably argue with Andrew Scheer about, but one thing I would never get in an argument with him about is House procedure. I think within that caucus, he's the guy who treats it almost like a second religion in terms of respect for that. And if he's saying like this is really offside, I think you should pay attention to that. And so I think there are arguments to be made around decorum in the House. I think there's a place to have that discussion, but I think the way that the Speaker approached it and the timing he chose to do that really was self-defeating, and probably at the end of the day made things worse, not better.
All right. Scott?
My Hey Yous is a short one for a change. It goes to Saskatchewan Premier Scott Moe. We talked about it in our previous pod and our live recording about the issue of pronouns and legislating it in the province of Saskatchewan.
Riders are not going to the Grey Cup, by the way.
No.
No.
And, so last week they introduced the bill and they passed the bill and they used the notwithstanding clause preemptively in order to do that. And I just think it's an absolute disgrace. And we've all talked about the substance and the politics of this and how it plays. But again, just an elected government is using notwithstanding clause to strip away rights of some of the most vulnerable in society. And it's just fucking wrong. It is the definition of kicking down and being a bully. And I don't know how that guy's going to get defeated, but I sure as shit hope he gets defeated someday.
Well, there's a poll out last week. That showed a smallest gap between the NDP and the Sask Party I've seen in probably 15, 20 years. And in the cities, in the two cities, the Sask Party was now getting smoked. I think this issue's actually gone sideways for them, but that's superficial analysis. Jordan.
Be richly deserved. My Hey You this week, with a hat tip to Luc Lebrun and Press Progress, is going out to Conservative MP Arnold Viersen. So we had a really interesting little incident this week where he invited about a dozen members of the, and I'm air quoting here, Save the Children convoy, which you might know, because these are the people who are conspiracy theorists who are so extreme that even the People's Party won't have anything to do with them. But our friend Arnold thought these folks needed a special invite into question period and brought them into the House, despite the fact that just the week before they'd had members arrested on Wellington Street and they'd had their leaders out at their forward operating base in Castleman calling for politicians to be arrested and for the government to be overthrown. So my Hey You this week is going out to whoever the hell is managing this issue in the Conservative leader's office, which is good fucking luck to you.
All hail the crazies in the Conservative back row. They're the best thing the other parties ever have going for them. My Hey You goes out to Liberal Housing Minister Sean Fraser for my weekly dose of the only good news one gets out of the Liberal government every week is there's an announcement somewhere that either he's cut a deal with a city or he's negotiating with a city. And there actually is positive news almost every week out of Sean Fraser about action on the housing file. It's stunning that this legislation existed before he was the housing minister and was completely unused in this respect. Absolutely stunning. But he is, by my measure right now, the only person on their front foot in that Liberal government. So, hey you, Sean Fraser. That's it for our show this week. I want to thank you all for watching and listening. Thanks, Scott and Jordan and Kory, for being here with me. Thank our presenting sponsor, TELUS, our sponsors, CN and the Canadian Cancer Society. And we'll see you next week with more Curse of Politics. See you then.